Thanks for watching Endgame Economics. If you enjoyed this video, hit subscribe. It's completely free for you, and it helps us continue making more videos like this.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking one of the most fascinating and honestly contradictory macroeconomic stories on the planet right now. We're looking at Ethiopia, a nation of 130 million people that is somehow Africa's fastest growing economy, yet, it just recently defaulted on its sovereign debt. It's a country building these massive multi-billion-dollar megaprojects while simultaneously facing some absolutely severe structural and geographical roadblocks. So we're going to map out the huge contradictions at the heart of Ethiopia's economy and try to understand how they all managed to live inside one single system. To really wrap our heads around this, we've got to start at the human level. Just imagine this. You're standing in a small electronics shop in Addis Ababa in July of 2024. You've saved up for 2 years, you buy a Samsung phone for 45,000 birr, and you walk out happy. But then, just 48 hours later, you walk back into that exact same shop, look at the exact same phone on the exact same shelf, and no way. It now costs 78,000 birr. The phone didn't change, the shop didn't change. What changed was the entire architecture of a country's currency, literally overnight. Okay, let's dive right into this with Section 1, the overnight currency shock. So how does a country's currency completely transform in 48 hours? We'll take a look at how this all unfolded. Ethiopia was hit by a really rapid succession of crises. Between 2020 and 2022, a brutal civil war in the northern Tigray region devastated the local economy. Combine that with a global pandemic, soaring grain prices, and a ballooning $36 billion external debt, and man, the country was basically running on fumes. By December 2023, Ethiopia actually defaulted on a sovereign bond payment. Completely out of options, the government went to the IMF and secured a $10.5 billion lifeline. But, as we all know, IMF money is never free, right? It always comes with strict conditions. And the biggest condition was this. Ethiopia had to float its currency, the birr. For decades, the government had just artificially set the price of its money. But on July 29, 2024, they finally let the open market decide. And the result? It was immediate and staggering. Freed from its fictional government-decreed value, the birr collapsed by roughly 100% against the US dollar over just 10 days. For the average Ethiopian household, this meant their savings lost about half of their dollar-equivalent purchasing power almost instantly. Now, the textbook tells us that a successful currency float requires 3 things working perfectly at the same time. Ample foreign reserves, usually about 6 to 12 months of import cover, an independent central bank, and structural export reforms. But Ethiopia was attempting this massive maneuver with reserves reportedly equal to less than 1 month of imports. They were essentially defending a fortress with 1 guard and a slingshot. And the institutional toll of this? Absolutely massive. Because the central bank holds state-owned, dollar-denominated obligations, floating the currency made those obligations suddenly much, much bigger in terms of birr. According to its own audited financials, the National Bank of Ethiopia booked a staggering operating loss of roughly 428 billion birr in a single fiscal year. Let me put that into perspective for a second. That's the equivalent of $2 to $4 billion just evaporating, simply by the central bank revaluing its own books. So, how did Ethiopia manage to keep the lights on after half its purchasing power disappeared? Well, let's look at Section 2, gold, coffee, and exports. And this brilliantly illustrates the sudden shift we saw in Ethiopia's export economy. Just look at this massive 10-fold jump in formal gold exports. In the 2023-24 fiscal year, they exported about 4 tons. The very next year, it shot up to roughly 39 tons, generating $3.5 billion. Now, this wasn't magic, right? It was driven by global gold prices rallying above $3,000 an ounce, combined with that birr float we just talked about. Because an ounce of gold sold in dollars was suddenly worth twice as many birr, it became highly profitable for miners to formally sell to the central bank rather than smuggling it out of the country. But here's the catch. While this commodity boom is totally saving the economy right now, it creates a really dangerous dependency trap. A staggering 70% of Ethiopia's export reliance is tied up in just 2 products, gold and coffee. Relying on primary commodities like this means Ethiopia's macroeconomic stability isn't really in its own hands anymore. It's borrowed from unpredictable global markets. If investor anxiety over gold drops, or, say, weather patterns shift in coffee-producing nations, Ethiopia's economic lifeline could just vanish. But hey, Ethiopia isn't just relying on shiny rocks and coffee beans. Let's shift our focus over to Section 3, mega projects and the airline. These are the unique internal engines keeping the country afloat, starting with an audacious infrastructure gamble, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam on the Blue Nile. This is a project with a price tag of around $5 billion. The sheer scale of it is mind-blowing. But what's even more unbelievable? It was financed entirely with domestic resources. No World Bank loans, no IMF facility. It was funded through government bonds, public donations, and diaspora remittances. It is effectively a massive national crowdfunding campaign that successfully built Africa's largest hydroelectric facility, and they did it despite fierce diplomatic opposition from downstream neighbors like Egypt. Alongside the dam is another homegrown powerhouse, Ethiopian Airlines. This company completely defies the conventional wisdom that state-owned enterprises in developing nations are just doomed to fail. It is literally the most profitable airline in Africa, generating $4.4 billion in just 6 months. They're Boeing's largest African customer and are even expanding into manufacturing aerospace parts. Now, to be fair, critics do point out that the airline operates inside a protective monopoly shell, benefiting from state protection and closed airspace. But even with that caveat, you can't deny that management has built a highly successful hub-and-spoke empire connecting the entire continent. All this domestic progress, however, runs headfirst into a massive geopolitical roadblock. Let's transition to Section 4, the geography problem. Let's look at how this builds into a really complex picture. The heavy anchor weighing down Ethiopia's ambitious development plans is simply this: how do you industrialize a nation of 130 million people without an ocean? Since losing its Red Sea coastline when Eritrea formally seceded back in 1993, Ethiopia has been the most populous landlocked country on Earth. And that is a sheer logistical nightmare for a country trying to build an industrial, export-driven economy. Because it has no coastline, roughly 85 to 95% of Ethiopia's trade has to be rerouted through neighboring Djibouti. This creates an estimated annual deadweight cost of $1.5 to $2 billion just in port fees and logistics. Think of it this way. It's like a massive Fortune 500 company being forced to lease its entire mailroom from a rival. It is an incredibly expensive rent to pay just to access the global market. The burden of this geographical trap led to this very quote from Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed in October 2023, where he called sea access an existential issue for the country. Now, this speech immediately set off alarms across the entire Horn of Africa region, with neighboring countries interpreting this desperate need for a port as a potential threat to their own sovereignty. And this all culminated in a highly controversial Memorandum of Understanding with Somaliland in January 2024. The deal reportedly involved a 50-year lease of coastline for Ethiopia, and in exchange, Ethiopia would recognize Somaliland as a sovereign state. Well, the regional diplomatic fallout was severe. Somalia, which claims Somaliland as its own territory, declared the deal null and void. Egypt and Eritrea formed a tacit alignment in opposition. As of mid-2026, the situation remains technically unresolved. No port has been built, but the agreement hasn't been formally scrapped either. It really just highlights the desperate lengths Ethiopia is exploring to solve its geography problem. So, we've got severe currency shocks, commodity dependency, magnificent megaprojects, and a regional geographic crisis. To reconcile all of this, let's zoom back out to Section 5, the growth paradox. Now, what's really interesting here is the sharp contrast between the headline statistics you might read in the news and the actual reality on the ground. On paper, if you just read the IMF tables, Ethiopia is booming. 9.2% GDP growth, dropping inflation, tripled reserves. But in reality, the GDP per capita is just $1,081, placing it in the bottom 25 globally. While inflation is technically falling, the removal of subsidies means regular citizens are paying 129 birr for a liter of fuel. And despite that massive new dam we talked about, 60 million people still do not have reliable electricity. It's absolutely crucial to understand why this specific context matters. That eye-catching 9.2% growth figure kind of flatters the reality. It relies heavily on 3 specific things: the formal financial influx of the gold boom, a massive one-time accounting shift when the Renaissance Dam came online and doubled electricity output, and the post-war construction sector. Actually, a massive 37% of the everyday economy is informal, making it practically invisible to these official growth metrics. Which brings us to the final pivotal question of this explainer. The gold and coffee revenues are definitely buying Ethiopia some vital breathing room right now. But is this commodity windfall a runway for lasting structural reform, or is it just a temporary destination before the next crisis hits? Ethiopia is running an unprecedented macroeconomic experiment at a massive scale. If they can build the internal distribution networks, stabilize their diplomacy, and foster formal industries, well, the math tilts in their favor. If not, the clock is ticking. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Stay curious and keep questioning the data.